Making nice waterfall charts inside of Power BI has always been a little bit difficult. You had to use custom visualizations or do what I'm doing here, which is use SVGs to render all of this kind of stuff inside of a matrix or a table. But it's become way easier, and you can actually make something like this using visual calculations and only a few lines of DAX code. And I'm going to show you how today. I'd like to point out this is the technique that was created by Fahmi Abdul Muttalib, and he's already posted about it on LinkedIn. And be sure to follow his YouTube channel, Excel Fort, because he does post a lot of really cool stuff as well. So let's jump right in. What we're going to do first is go to the dataset. It's a really simple dataset, but one thing that you're going to realize with financial data is that you usually have what looks like this, right? So you've got a specific category of items, and it's like, okay, so maybe they're not labeled correctly, which is fine, but you've got a specific category of items and independent values for those items. And this is very common for, it's like financial data sets where you're essentially looking at, it's like different parts. So licensing, consulting, maintenance, and other revenue, these are parts of the sales revenue category. And, it's like all of these things added together make this value. This is the value for the past year, and this is the value for the current year. And we can see that licenses, it's like I have like the greatest part, etc. And the way that the waterfall works is that each line is basically accumulating to, it's like a specific point. And then the operating expenses, you might have operating income that increases that value, but then the expenses take away from the flat value. And all of these different categories together are essentially going to show you this is how much you made in the last year, this is how much you made in the current year. And it's important to note it could go into the negatives as well, because it is completely possible that your business is in the red. And this is kind of reflected inside the data where we have, it's like the total column is essentially showing those categories. The category here is showing, it's like what subcategories are going to, it's like be shown here. We have the year, and then the CY is just the value. It usually stands for current year, but I've just used that to represent what actual values for the specific year. The other thing that's really important is index category and index totals. Now, these two things are actually there, and they represent either the, it's like totals or the category column. And the reason that it needs to be there is because if we decided to order this visual by anything else other than the, it's like actual index values, it would look very strange, because now it no longer aligns there. It needs to be a very specific order in order for you to be able to see the data as it should be in a way that represents a proper waterfall. So this is just one of the things to, it's like understand. If you don't have this kind of index for your categories already set up in your, it's like report, this isn't going to work. So this is very important to think about. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to basically just open up a fresh, it's like page. The only thing that's really here is the fact that you've got, it's like the year tables, 2014 and 2015. And if you'd like to follow along, then you can just go into the description and you will get the starter file for this report. So you'll have all of these different things. But the starter file isn't going to do you as much good, because what you're going to need inside of the actual, it's like visual is to use visual calculations. And that I might just throw into, a specific measure, and you might just have to copy and paste that. Okay. So what we're going to do is first we're going to actually just throw in a matrix, and the reason that I'm using a matrix is very simple. It's like I'm going to be trying to, it's like create some stuff here, and I think the hierarchy works a little bit better for that. And what we're going to do is we're going to put in the total and the category for, it's like into the rows field. Okay, let's see if we can make this a little bit more visible. Here we go. So we've got sales, operating expenses, etc. This looks fine. I'm going to open up the formatting, and what we're going to do is we're going to go into layout and style presets. I always like to change this to none or minimal, and then from compact we're going to make this into an outline. I think it's a little bit cleaner. It doesn't really matter for you, it's like how you want to do it. It's just choose your own layout and style presets if you like. So we're going to throw in past year and current year. Past year is literally, because of the way the data set is being done, we can't use the same period last year function because we don't have a dates table. So all I'm doing is the current year is just the sum of the specific year that you've selected, and past year is just going to remove that year filter and then find the data for the past year. So this works pretty fine. There's, it's like really no problems with this one. And what I'm going to do is, first you see that the totals are at the top. Let's say, it's like that's not really what I want. I want the totals to be at the bottom. How would you go about doing that? For one, you can turn off the column subtotals because that would be additions to the actual columns. And if we go to the row subtotals, we can see that the subtotal label is total and the position is top. So we can click this and make it bottom, and then you'll see that all of the totals show up at the bottom. So this is, it's like pretty straightforward. What we're going to do next is we're going to do a nice little trick, because let's say we have totals in category, and this isn't necessarily what I want to show. I want to show sales revenue to be the total value. But you can't actually do that because you can see that, you can rename every single label as something else. Let's say subtotal, or, it's like whatever. But that goes for every specific category, and it's really difficult to change this, it's like one by one. So a very nice trick that you can do, well, it doesn't matter what this is called. The nice trick that you can do here is to go into your row headers, make sure that text wrap is turned off, and then oh wait, sorry, I think it needs to be turned on. And then what that means is you can actually just hide these. Sorry, the text wrap turned off. Yeah, okay. So, and then I think I also need to go to the column headers and make sure the text wrap is turned off there. So that means that I can just hide these, and I think I need to turn off the plus minus icons as well. And then I can hide the category as well. And why would you actually want to do this? Well, the reason is that I've got a label function here. This label function is basically telling me if the category is, it's like in scope, if the level that I'm on is on the category level, show me the first category. Otherwise, if we're seeing the total, it's a column, show me what total is being shown. And this is a nice little trick that allows you to essentially show licenses and sales revenue and all of this stuff, and it looks like the total. We see that there's even a little bit of an indent, and the reason that there's a slight indent there is because I'm putting a, it's like an indent directly into the measure. And this looks really nice, and I'm already pretty happy with how this looks from just a, it's like financial point of view, like pretty okay with how that, it's like is being shown. But let's make this a little bit better. How do we actually start adding the waterfall information is going to be, it's like very, very straightforward. So in order to actually do that, what we're going to do is first we're going to click on the more options when you're hovering over the, it's like matrix. We're going to click on more options and click on new visual calculation. You don't actually have to click on any of these. You can click on just the first one, custom. If you click on any of these other ones, what it's going to do is it's going to give you a template for, it's like the visual calculation itself. And this is pretty nice. It's like it allows you to kind of figure out how to use the visual calculations very quickly. But what we're going to do is we're going to start using this visual calculation in order to create the waterfall. Now we're going to do this a little bit differently. Usually I just, it's like copy and paste things, but I'm going to actually try writing all of this down for you so that you can kind of understand why we're doing the things that we're doing. So we're going to call this waterfall, and we're going to, it's like basically say, look, we're going to create a variable, it's like A, and this variable is going to be, it's like the current year. And this is really interesting. This is one of the cool things about visual calculations. I'm calling in the, it's like column that we're using here. Well, the measure that we're using here, CY. And because this is a measure that's already in the table, it's not going to, it's like calculated again or anything like that. It's just creating it, it's like pretty much straight out. And it's really, really nice that it just works this way. So variable A is going to be current year. Variable, oh gosh. Variable B is going to be the running sum. So running sum is actually really interesting because this is a function that only exists inside of visual calculations. And what it does is on every row, it allows you to add the sum of the specific values. So it's like a cumulative value. So past year, it's like running sum here would be sum 13 plus 72. And then here would be sum 13 plus 72 plus 22, etc., etc. And this is really nice. But if we want to get, if we're on maintenance and we want to get the value of these two and not including this one, all we would have to do is just do the running sum subtracted by the current year value. And that allows us, when we're on the sales revenue here for, well, other revenue here, for example, we'll add all of these together except for the row that you're on. And this is going to be important in just a second. You'll see why. And then we're going to create a variable C. And that C is going to be if A is greater than 0, then show, it's like B. Otherwise, we're going to show just the running sum. Now, these look like a whole bunch of different variables, and it might be a little bit confusing at first, but it's going to make all the kinds of sense in just a second. So let's take a look at what this actually shows. So variable A is just current year. So if we just returned current year, what would we see? We would see exactly the same value, current year inside of the waterfall. That's pretty good. But if we change that and we look at the value B, what it's going to do is you can see that here it's doing a running sum. Hang on, I can actually do this one at a time. So here what we're doing is the running sum of current year subtracted by the current year. So here it makes sense because the running sum would only be this one value. So it's subtracting this value by the actual, it's like row level value of the current year, which is 0. Here it's showing the, it's like running sum subtracted by current year. So these two values subtracted by 90, so it makes sense that it's this value. And 986 is the sum of these two values here. 996 is the sum of these three values, etc., etc. And here you can kind of see that it's showing 0 as a value, and the reason it's showing 0 as a value is that we are basically saying all of these things, but for the sales revenue, which is the sum of all of these values. Of course, all of these values subtracted by itself is going to equal 0. It makes a whole lot of sense. But this doesn't really work for us in terms of the waterfall because, it's like we actually want to show a value on every single row. So if we return C, where we have this small condition, if, hang on, is that the right condition? Yeah, okay. The C condition is going to be used when we're taking this in scope. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense right now, but it will in just a second. Okay, hang on. So we've got all of this, and this is working pretty nicely. And then what we want to do is we want to do something like this. Okay, so let's not think about C for now, but what we want to do is we want to identify, okay, so let's think about what is, okay, I'm going to just need to put a value here. What is a waterfall? A waterfall needs to be something that essentially shows a specific value, it's like, and this is going to be the value of the current year because that's what we're looking at. But after the current value, we need to show it it's like put in a whole number of blank spaces and then put in a, it's like number of, it's like values in order to show, it's like that as a bar. Because we're doing this inside of visual calculations, the way that we're doing it is we're going to be using special characters in order to, represent either the bar or an empty space. In order to do that, what we're going to do is we are saying, let's use this waterfall value. Let's, it's like take a look at this running sum, and that running sum is going to be our empty space. We're actually going to use, it's like C as our empty space, and that's going to be done by doing a very simple repeat function. The repeat function, essentially what it does is it repeats a given text a certain number of times. And we're going to be using the unichar function in order to create, so the function, the number that we're using is this 8202, and this creates an empty space. And what the repeat function does is it's going to create an empty space a specific number of times, C number of times for this specific value. So that will create that empty space, for us initially. And if I click commit, you can actually see that now the waterfall chart is just a really long amount of empty space. That's exactly what we want. Doesn't look great yet, so bear with me. This still counts as text. So what we're going to do is we're going to now create the actual bar section. So we're going to use the repeat function, and so we're going to do unichar, and this is going to be 9608, and that's going to be used to create the actual bar. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create the absolute value of x, not x, a. So a, as you see, is just the current year value, and it doesn't really do anything more than all of this. Now this looks terrible. This is not exactly what we're looking for, but the reason that this is happening is it's actually pretty simple. First, what we got to do is we got to understand that if you try to put in 1000 or something inside of specific bars, that's a whole lot of bars. That's kind of why it's doing that first. But also, why is it all showing all the values to the left? It's because if we go into our format, and then we go into our specific column, click on the waterfall, gotta make sure that it's aligned to the left. And then it will start to look a little bit more like what it's supposed to. Still a couple of things that we need to do, but let's get started on them one by one. So you see that it's a little bit too large in general. So what's a good practice to do is to divide all of these values by a specific number. You might want to try to figure out some logic to make this proper. And what I mean proper is make this a dynamic value. Divide 20 by however much you actually want it to be. But I've just divided it by 20 for now because I want to keep the logic as simple as possible. But this still doesn't look like the waterfall. So if we go back to the report, you see this, and that looks nothing like what we're trying to show here. The reason for that is because of the font size. What we're showing here is a mono-spaced font style, which means every single letter or character takes up the exact same amount of space. Now, unless you're actually doing that, the waterfall is always going to look like this, and you could cheat a little bit to try to, multiply the empty spaces by 3.5 or something to try to get the exact right, amount of space. Or what you can do is you can go into the values and change the font to, I believe, Consolas. Consolas is a monospaced font. It looks, honestly, I like the way that it looks, but you can see that it looks almost perfect immediately. And there's not much more you need to do. It works just fine. So this is going good, but now we need to add a couple more things. So for one night, what we would like to do is to add some color. If it's positive, make it green. And if it's negative, if it's going down, make it red. So I've got a function here. It's like a DAX measure, which is basically going to say, look, this is the color red that I want to use. This is the color green. If we're looking at the category, make it, and the current year is positive, make it red, otherwise make it green, otherwise make it gray. Pretty straightforward. The way that we implement that is hover over your waterfall in your, values field, right click on it, conditional formatting for the font color. Font color is really important because if we use background color, it's going to look very different. And all of these different items are text technically. So go into your font color, gradient, click on the gradient, click on field value, and we're going to look for waterfall color. Great. And this is looking pretty good. But some things are off. So you gotta look at this, and you gotta look at this. Some things are a little bit off. We want to look at the totals from 0 upwards, and the reason that we're doing that is because after every category, we want to see where are we as a total, because operating expenses at this point is summing everything. So it's important to figure out the operating expenses here. They don't look right just yet. So we're gonna go back. We're gonna go into our waterfall. And we're going to try to do a little bit more, logic that we can actually use. So the first logic that we're going to do is we're going to we're gonna go and my apologies about this. I can't make unfortunately right now I don't know how I can make this specific size space look a little bit bigger, because this is a visual calculation. So we're gonna try to make things a little bit tighter so that there's a little, oh gosh, a little less it's like space. This makes the how do you say, values look a little bit worse in my opinion, but I think it's it's like generally okay. It's fine, those are variables, you can figure that out. Okay, we'll even put the return up here so that you can see as much of the code in one place as possible. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to do a switch true, and that switch true is going to say is in scope. We want to see if the category is in scope. If it is in scope, category. And what that's going to do is, if something is in scope, if the category is in scope, which is just right here, it's going to do something. But if the sales revenue is in scope, that's the total column. So what we're going to try to do is something slightly different here, where we basically say, look, if the it's like if the category is in scope, show this. But otherwise, if the total is in scope, we're only going to show this part. Okay, it's like this is going to happen a couple of times. It's like when you actually make an issue, you can click on see details, and you can see that the waterfall is missing a line on line 12, etc., etc. Maybe I need to just add another, it's like column there, and this is fine. So first, we've created this. It looks okay, but you can still see that the operating expenses here, this is not correct, right? So we got to go figure out what's going on here and what's going on here. So if we actually go back to the report, and we can see that this is starting to look a little bit more similar to this, but you can also kind of tell that it's like these values are just not aligned. It's like some things are going wrong still. So we gotta try to figure that out. Yeah, I think I've basically it's like found it. So absolute A here, it's like would essentially just be giving it's like what is the current year value here, but we don't necessarily want to do that. What we want to show is the running sum divided by 20 here, which we could potentially put into a different, it's like value into a different variable, but for now, this is just what I've chosen to do. And that makes everything, it's like basically perfectly aligned, so that after every category, we see what is the total. So at, the sales revenue is, it's like this much. After operating expenses have been accounted for, it's this much. It's like after, investment income and financial income net, which is, it's like, I guess investment items, and then it's like result before tax, and then you put in income tax, and then that's the result after tax, and then what is the group result after profit to other interests. You gotta understand as well that the result before tax, this is able to be here because that is the actual it's like value that's put into it's like here. But of course it's like this could just be it's like named something else. Instead of being called result before tax, it could just be called it's like investment incomes or whatever it's like you'd like, and the label could be modified in the it's like label it's like measure itself. But for now it's like this is just what it looks like. So that was pretty easy to do. The most difficult part about this, in my opinion, is the fact that it's like this is inside of inside of the visual itself, so it's not a DAX measure, so to speak, that exists to be used across all of your visuals. This is something that exists solely inside the one visual, but because it's reusing the values that already exist, it's way faster. And also, it has the added benefit because it's basically a font. It's just text. If you export this to a CSV, people will see this bar chart, and that's pretty cool. However, one thing to figure out is that, of course, the 20 is the problem. Why is the 20 the problem? What if you have values which are, it's like 100 or, it's like something like that. So sometimes it makes sense to try to figure out, it's like a singular variable to, it's like figure out what this ratio should be. Like, are you dividing by 20? And you can figure that out by going to, it's like, what is the maximum value that you'd like to be able to show? And you literally do, it's like max CY in my opinion. Here, we can even do something like this where we show you max equals max CY. And then you can see, it's like, okay, so that's just showing the max for every specific, it's like row. So if we say, I think maybe we can do this. No, yeah, so collapse all is just going to give us the totals, not necessarily the, it's like maximum value. Hang on, let me try to see if I can figure this out. When you're actually, so you can click on this FX button and you can see, it's like the actual moving average and all of these different things. But sometimes it's a little bit difficult to figure out, it's like how to find the maximum values and stuff like that. I do have this somewhere. Let me figure this out. Okay, so basically what I've done to, it's like resolve this is I've created a measure that will show the maximum value, it's like for every row. But the way that you want to calculate this is going to be different based around, it's like what your actual measure and your data model looks like. So it might be that it's not exactly the same way that you're going to calculate it. So it's very important to be able to, it's like figure that out. Once you have the actual maximum value, you could use it to actually, it's like create some kind of measure in order to be able to, it's like identify what you want to be, it's like showing. So I have this here and that'll be like 800 or something, right? And then I can just divide that by, for example, 50 or something, and that will give me an actual value. There are some problems with this, which is the fact that if it's too small, like some very small values, like 6, for example, it might not show up as a bar. And, it's like that's just something that it's just the problem with the fact that we're using characters to represent, it's like the actual bar. So one thing that you do need to be watch out for, but also you have to, it's like be aware that if you want to use this value inside of a, it's like visual calculation, it does need to be in the actual, it's like values field. You can hide it by clicking on this button here that says hide from visual, so it doesn't show up, but it does need to be inside of the measure itself. Okay. One additional thing is that I've gone and changed the divide by 20 to, it's like X, so that it actually makes a little bit more sense and everything's, it's like here. But you also have to identify that I've changed, it's like all the CY values to be, it's like wrapped around with ABS, and that stands for the absolute. It's a function that gives you the, it's like value, whether it's positive or negative, and you have to do this in case you have any negative values. What if, for example, it's like the negative value is at the very front? It won't work. Like the visual will fail because you can't repeat a character negative number of times. So it just makes, perfect sense that you do have to put whatever you, it's like value you want inside of the absolute, it's like function. Otherwise, there's a big possibility of the report failing. And that's also why we have a function B. If, it's like the current year value is greater than, it's like 0, you're showing B. Otherwise, you should have the absolute value. And it's because, it's like here, for example, we do want to show the negative values, but we have to go back this amount. Otherwise, it's like we're not going to be able. Otherwise, what would happen is that this would go upwards instead of downwards. And, it's like we need to be able to make sure that the number of space that we're going is very specifically not, it's like is actually aligned. And this is basically how we do that. Otherwise, the, it's like negative values would go, it's like to, it's like positively, I guess that's the best way to put it. And it just wouldn't be the, it's like the waterfall that we see here. And that's basically, it's like how we do the waterfall part. And if we actually wanted to, it's like see how to do, it's like this part, this is kind of a trick, right? The way that we're doing this here is that we're actually putting 2 different values. So we've got the delta, and the delta is literally just what is the, current year minus the past year. Really not a big deal at all. But if we have the delta PY, we could very easily just put into, it's like visual calculations. If delta PY is positive, it's like, and if delta PY is negative, and this creates like a, kind of like a bar chart that shows, whether it's going, it's like upwards or downwards. And if we have that, it basically does mean that we can essentially create, it's like multiple bar charts. So let's just do that very quickly. New visual calculation custom, it's like negative delta is equal to if delta py, okay, if delta py is greater than 0, is less than 0, that is. If it's less than 0, give us delta py. And this here, essentially what we're going to do is we can choose to do something like this where we, it's like make it into just a data bar, and that would essentially work as well. But we can also just use exactly the same thing that we've been doing here, where we simply repeat the character delta py number of times. So for example, you see, it's like repeat the absolute value of, right, delta py and divide it by x. It is good to use x because we can get basically the exact same, how do you say, size, it's like ratio as over here. And we just have to make sure that we're spelling everything correctly. So you can actually see that that would actually kind of work to show negative 14. But of course, these delta py values are much smaller than this. So it might be that you make this slightly bigger. So instead of putting 40, we can put in, the other way. We have to make the denominator here much bigger. To do it like this, and then you can see there are still some values, but maybe let's try 100 instead. You can see that this is a little bit bigger, and this is a little bit of the more annoying part because it is not really possible for you to be able to say that this should be, it's like bigger or smaller. And of course, instead of using, it's like the same bars, we can do something else as well very easily, where we do something like unichar. We can make this one something like 9473, and what that will do is make it into a specific line. That's pretty cool. And we can just, to copy this, and let's see, we'll copy this and we will create a brand new one, which will be positive delta, and that literally is just one single sign change. Then you've got this. Now, this doesn't look exactly right, but of course, it's just going back to your formatting and making sure that, let's see, positive delta, if you go to specific columns, positive delta is aligned to the left. And if it is aligned to the left and, it's like everything is working out, then this actually is, it's like much better. So hang on, let me just put this here. Sure that everything's, it's like spaced properly, and that should be fine. Of course, it's like you might want to make this smaller just so that everything fits as well. But just remember that you want to make sure that whatever this, it's like ratio is, it's the same for negative and positive. And we have another color here, which is called delta color. Literally just says if the delta py is greater than 0, make it green, otherwise make it red. And we can put that on both of these. So we can conditionally format the font color for both the negative and the positive with delta color. So that's the negative ones. And then here, then we have the positive ones. And then that basically shows us how much the delta is. And this is basically it. This will be, most of what you want to do. If you see that there's this tiny black, it's like line here, that's just the column, the row subtotals for the grand total. So you can actually go and just go to, for example, go to the per row level, go to the total, show subtotal off, and then that just, disappears. But of course, the values have disappeared as well, so maybe that's not what you want to do. You might want to go to something like row grand total, and make the text color white, and that turns this off as well. And if we put that back up, it's black, but then you still see that there's this tiny little bit of text. That bit of text is the totals. So you can see that, it's like at the very beginning, we put in row subtotals, we put in, it's called DFG, right? So if you just put in a space here, then you can kind of see that, it's like a sort of that text there. And if you go to the grid, and go to the border for, I believe it's row headers, and you turn off that selected value there, you can turn this off as well. It's a little bit, it's like annoying that this is what it is, but it's like this is the only way that you can have the actual label that you want to show, as well as this. If there are additional things that, it's like I would do personally, maybe it's only, turning off the background, size and style, turning off the background. And you can also kind of tell that instead of negative delta and positive delta, I've done a small trick where I've called the negative delta and the positive bar, so it kind of looks like it's saying delta bar, which you can absolutely totally do. And that brings us to the end of the tutorial. I really hope that you've learned something here today and you have as much of a new appreciation for visual calculations that I do. I think it's really cool that you're able to do this even with text, and honestly, it looks exactly like what I would like to show. But the addendum is that if you actually want to use this and make it look more professional like an SVG without using third-party visuals, I really recommend you to check out my actual classroom, where I will be showing you how to make all of this with all of the files that are completed. This is a really good way for you to be able to, it's like accelerate your reports if you'd like. But if you'd still like to, it's like try this from the very beginning, the actual starter file will be here inside of my GitHub, which will also be in the description. Thanks for watching and take care.